Hey everybody. So look, I know I didn't do Life After Lockup, and I had told you I wasn't sure if I was going to be reviewing it anyway. Nevertheless, we were in school until yesterday. Um, I'm hanging out with my brother, um, and the family is going for Christmas. So I just want to get on here, and I'll do another review for Love and Marriage Huntsville tonight. But I want to get on here and talk about a documentary called Aftershock. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but I think it's really important. Aftershock is a Hulu documentary, and it's about how many black women die in healthcare. And for those of you who don't know, and this is not in relation to Dr. Jackie Foolishness, I never thought she was a good doctor. Anybody that judgmental is not good for you and helps perpetuate the problem. Um, and I don't understand why people didn't have an issue with her before, because she is representative of the dismissiveness toward other black women. And it's probably been trained by white doctors, but should know better. So when I heard this season, when I was watching it, she was like, well, black women have higher issues because they don't get the same kind of care. Before all this fallout, I was just like, you don't get that care either. Anyway, but this is about black women dying in childbirth, shortly after childbirth, by not being taken seriously. We have the highest infant mortality rate in this country, and maternal death rates. And we are among the industrialized, high-tech nations of the world. So we are the only developed country with this high rate. And it is specifically because of the death rates of black women that the United States leads in that. Okay? So anyway, we start off with, God rest her soul, Shamani Gibson, a black woman who died that did not have to. She passed away when she was 30. Okay? With her second child. The doc starts about 4 months after Shamani Gibson passes, with her mother Shawnee and her husband at an event in her memory on her birthday. So I was trying to figure out, where did this happen? It was happening in New York. But then I had to stop myself, because it doesn't matter where it happened in America. And I'm going to say why. Because I think, myself included, and sometimes other black people, the way we deal with our pain and the extent of racism sometimes is just to say, oh yeah, I'm not surprised that happened in Mississippi, or I'm not surprised that happened in Georgia, or maybe if they were in Michigan or Illinois or New York, this wouldn't have happened. And that's bullshit. Racism is an American problem. Just like Malcolm X said, there is no north and south of the United States. There's only south of Canada, because they all do the same racist shit. Anyway, he didn't say the shit part, but you get what I mean. So anyway, she ended up with a C-section, Shamani. Her husband Omari said they got home the next day after her delivery, and she was complaining about shortness of breath, so on and so forth. He said he called the doctor, he explained her symptoms, and they were just like, she needs to relax and rest, she'll be fine. So he tried to do that. She's complaining about this daily for like 2 weeks. He said she complained about having really sharp chest pains 2 weeks later, like really bad ones. And she said she didn't care. She wanted to go to the hospital regardless. So they called 911. In the process of calling 911, she passed out. And they said the paramedics come with an ambulance. Okay? And 3 of these paramedics asked the mother separately, well, was she on drugs? Was she on drugs? Was she on drugs? First of all, she's passed out. What the fuck does that matter at this point? Because we know that white girls be using and falling out all the time. But they don't do that. So miss me with the bullshit. Well, if you on drugs, don't do it. I'm not that kind of black person. Okay, don't. All right. So anyway, and the mother was like, I told that person over there that she wasn't on drugs. Like, do y'all talk? They finally put her in an ambulance. They took her to the closest hospital, which was not the one they wanted to go to, which was not a hospital known for giving good care, which, as far as I'm concerned, and yeah, I guess maybe in my democratic socialist mind, I don't think any hospital that's not good or able to provide good care should be allowed to be open in this country. But we all know who that's for. Anyway, so it wasn't a good one, but they didn't have time. Her life was at risk. So he said he was watching, literally, Omari, her husband, was watching his partner pass away while dealing with the stereotypes of, how we look, the color of our skin, all the unspoken things that black people feel and know that other people try to gaslight us into. Well, how do you know? What makes you think that? Well, you may be overthinking it. Bullshit. Okay, because we've been dealing with it since the day we were fucking born. Okay? Anyway, and he was like dealing with all of that. He was like, he just kind of stopped. He was like, tough is not the word. It's damn near impossible. It's only God's grace that you still standing. If white people spent 24 hours in our shoes, most of them, many of them, would more than likely commit suicide. There's no way in hell. They couldn't take it. They could not take what they give to us and have given to us for centuries. Period. Don't worry, I'll put the link for that Oprah episode when that white man went black for 48 hours and was just so broken he couldn't finish the experiment. Ain't that a bitch? Then tried it 20 years later and still couldn't do it. He couldn't handle it. And then they want to tell us this stuff ain't real. Anyway, in the words of Chris Rock, would you switch places with me? Exactly. So don't tell me everything's all right. So he's talking and saying that his daughter, the oldest girl, who they had, baby girl, who was like 2 or 3 years old, that's it, is always asking about her mother. And, any parent would be affected by that. And, he says at the end, like, I've always tried to keep it together, but some of the rage and grief, I could have killed somebody thinking about how they let my wife die. And she didn't have to. And it's like that killing rage that Bell Hooks describes in her book, Killing Rage, on how white people treat black people so poorly. And those active acts of racism, people call them microaggressions. They're macroaggressions, microaggressions. White people do it all the fucking time. And then we have to literally sit around and decide how we feel about this. No, not how we feel, how we're going to act toward how we feel. Because we have to literally fucking survive. And that creates a rage that has to go somewhere. And his wife didn't have to die over some bullshit racist doctor saying her pain was no big deal. And it was multiple doctors when they would call. Like, they would just tell them, oh, it's no big deal. So then we get the next single black father who lost his partner, Amber Rose Isaac, in the Bronx, New York. And her partner, Bruce, is now raising their child. He talks about her telling him that she was pregnant, and they, were really excited and everything. He said in her second or third trimester, he said she started experiencing headaches and dizziness. He said they would call the doctor, who would tell her, don't come in, but instead just said, these are regular pregnancy symptoms, she'll be fine. And, that's your first child. It's a doctor, so you're presuming. So he said he took it upon himself to start looking up doulas, Bruce. Doulas and midwives. Because actual doctors and healthcare professionals were not helping her. They weren't responding to her treatment. I mean, like, you take her in, oh, there's nothing wrong, this is normal, not giving her anything. So he said when he goes to find a midwife, he takes the papers from the hospital, Montefiore, and I'm saying the name, so anybody out in the Bronx, New York, or anybody in New York that ends up there, it's a terrible hospital, okay, because they're suing them now. He shows her the paperwork from the last, checkup or whatever she had from the doctor when she was having a baby. And the midwife points out that she only has 141 platelets. She said anytime it decreases past 150, that's cause for hospitalization and concern. Literally. It decreased so quickly. It went from 141, 97, 51, 48. The doula was the one who said she needs to be hospitalized because these were too low. The hospital is printing out paperwork from her checkup and acting like it's no big deal. So the doctor saw this shit. So she got there and her platelets kept declining to the point of death. Yeah. Her partner was like, this happened, but it could have been prevented. This didn't have to happen. They just did not want to give her the care, as a black woman. So they had these numbers. And the hospital's response to their questioning about the platelets, which they're now suing them for, though, was that we have a mortality rate of 0.01%. So essentially, your daughter is just really a small minority. It has nothing to do with our care. Y'all some low down dirty sons of bitches, and y'all gonna burn in hell. All right, and you deserve it. That was the only explanation her mother got. Fuck y'all. All right, so Bruce and Omari actually meet up. Bruce, of course, being Amber Isaac's partner, and Omari being Shamani's husband. So they actually meet up to support each other. They're running, that kind of thing. And they're supporting each other in their journey. I mean, really, because they hear about it in the news of this happening to these other people, which I think is good. It's good that they were brought together based on this. And I don't mean based on the situation, because it shouldn't be happening anyway, because it all can be avoided. But instead, the support they could get from each other, and as black men who are the main caretakers of their children now that the mothers have died. So Omari and the mother, Shamani's mother's name is Shawnee, and she was on top of it. They meet up to talk with a person at the Weeksville Heritage Center in Brooklyn. Now, Weeksville is a memorial to some free blacks that were in New York that made a community for themselves, pushed off like every other black person. And they wanted basically a room, a space in the center for black fathers to come and support each other due to black maternal deaths. And the mother was talking to the woman, who is in charge, the director of the center. And she was saying she never actually thought this would happen to her daughter. And in my head, I'm thinking, like, why? I mean, not like you want to think the worst, but just like, duh. She was like, because she does this work. She's a reproductive justice advocate. And as a black maternal health care advocate, she was like, I had the knowledge of all of these issues. And then at the same time, I had to think, well, why couldn't it happen to me? Because we're black and brown. And of course it could. And so she made the point that knowledge doesn't save you. And it reminded me so much of when W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about Sam Hose, who was a black man, who was a sharecropper in Noonan, Georgia. And this white man refused to pay him for his work, and then attempted to hit Sam Hose, and Sam Hose, fucked him up. You can look this up. And Du Bois he's writing about the lynching. The lynching was advertised for, as many lynchings were. They were treated almost like carnivals and county fairs. And white people, men and women and children. Okay? That's why white women's issues are not our issues in the same way. Would come and watch this and smile, take pictures, take souvenirs at lynchings. Not just Sam Hose, but I'm going somewhere with this. W.B. Du Bois was working at what is now Clark Atlanta University, but it was Atlanta University at the time. And he was walking up the street to take some article to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is the main paper in Atlanta, then and now, really. And on his way walking up from the university, he saw in a butcher shop in the window where this white man had Sam Hose, this black man's knees, hanging where you chop animals for food as a souvenir from his lynching. And he never makes it. And Du Bois writes, I never made it to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And that hit me hard because I realized that I actually believed we could educate the masses with the talented 10th. And the talented 10th is not as bad as people say it is. It was essentially that, a small tenth of black people have access to education, in those post-slavery, early 20th century years. But the talented 10th has a responsibility to then go back and use their talents to help educate the entire race. That to me is not a bad idea. But he said he realized that knowledge wasn't going to be enough, that this problem is racism and violence and hatred, and we can't even educate ourselves out of it. And that's what it reminded me of because who doesn't want to believe they can do something to fix the heinous violence around them, so on and so forth. And Du Bois was still young, first black man to get his PhD from Harvard in history and so on and so forth. But I'm just saying, it's those moments that only black people have to live, that other white people don't. And it's infuriating. And so all I could think was, as this woman was talking and she was, getting choked up, it just infuriated me because I was seeing this black woman cry over losing her child again. And that is an image I'm so tired of seeing. And that's not to disparage her. I'm talking about just the image, because especially when it's preventable. Black women have to cry and mourn their children more than anybody else in this fucking country for shit that doesn't have to happen. Okay? That's preventable through modern medicine or through the self-control of police officers. We actually die for no other reason than the fact that we're black. That's actually true for us. Don't let nobody gaslight you into, well, it has to be more than that. The fuck it is. Anyway, poor white people don't die the same way we do. So miss me with the classism bullshit. Okay, Serena Williams, Beyonce, they experienced it too. Anyway, so Omari is a math teacher. He does art on the side as his personal hobby and way of grieving. I'm sure he probably sells some of them, but he makes a lot of art. But he's a math teacher, by profession, and he's literally sitting there with a 2 or 3 year old girl who's doing work. He's trying to teach her, right, and having a baby, having to change the diaper. And I know there's women who do this every day, but I'm talking about this documentary. But I know how hard it is to be a teacher. And while he's doing this, he's calling another kid's house to make sure he tells the parent about missing math homework and how they may fall behind. And he wants to work with the boy, who actually ends up picking up the phone because he thinks, because he's trying to reach the parent. And he was like, I'll sit down with you, but I need you to really work. And here he is being a teacher. And some people don't understand how hard it is to be a teacher and how much work is involved, because we only seem to respect professions where people are paid heavily. And I really felt for him. So Omari has a support circle where about a handful of people, as he described it looked like maybe 10 or 12 men. To me, that's a lot. That men came telling their stories about really having lost their wives / partners in the birthing process. So one man said, literally, my wife died in giving birth. And he said, I had to take a DNA test in that hospital where my wife died giving birth to be able to take my son home. And I said, if that ain't some racist shit, I said, they would have never tried that with no white man married to his fucking wife and asked him to take a DNA test, because black people must be stealing. And a white man would have probably been a serial killer, stealing baby out of the hospital and everything else. Anyway, and the man, you could tell, was really broken. He was like, I really don't know what I can do. He said, because at the end of the day, they don't care. And yes, that will leave you despondent, because it's hard to grieve and be depressed and to lose a wife and then raise a child over some shit that would not have happened to her if she was a white woman. Just that simple. So next they hold a press conference dealing with black maternal health care with Bruce, who was the man who lost his partner in the Bronx. And it was supported by Black Lives Matter in New York. And it is another aspect of Black Lives Matter. We actually deserve to be born into safety and to live. And as one black woman put it, whose name I forgot, she wasn't in the documentary, but she was on a panel at Schomburg. And she was like, white women talk about having the right to go into labor and to have kids born healthy. For black women, it's not just simply the right to, have abortion, not have abortion, have healthy, safe births. For us, it's the right to be able to see our children grow up and live. Not to be shot down by the police for no reason, or to be assaulted in school for making mistakes. And this is boys and girls. And that stuck out to me. There's so many other things. And Bruce then sits on this Zoom panel convened by this Harvard doctor, professor, whatever, whose name is Dr. Neal. And Bruce is telling people about Amber's story. He said, my partner essentially lost her life because of negligence and incompetence on the part of these doctors. He was like, from the OBGYN themselves to the secretary. She was met with nastiness, rudeness, They, rushed her, that all that kind of shit, talking down to her, everything. He was like, even on the day she went into labor, security looked at him and was like, okay, baby daddy, just go over there. She'll be fine. I said, what in the hell? And I believe it, don't get me wrong. What kind of fuck shit is this? Stuff that only happens to other black people. So then they start showing healthcare stats and how the improvement for the intervention in the mother's health has increased through cesarean sections, induced labor, whatever. If there are any problems to help protect the baby and the mother in America. But yet the infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rate have increased despite this, primarily because of the deaths of black women. This is bad. This is really bad. Like the lack of shame of the United States, one of the most industrialized and high-tech nations in the world, never ceases to amaze me. Because any principles they have always disappear when black people are involved. Now, say what you want about Kamala Harris, the vice president, Madam Vice President. I'm not a huge fan for my own reason. I'm not going to even get into it. But the bottom line is she has kept her word and has been fighting and speaking about black maternal health care, creating policy to support and protect black maternal health care. Yes, even calling it racist. So some of y'all, be like, I don't know where she is. No, you need to read the news and stay up on it. Okay, instead of waiting for a headline from the Shade Room to tell you that Kamala is at some, HBCU game and make it seem like she ain't been doing nothing. She can't help the fact that Sleepy Joe is, never mind, I ain't gonna start because I want to stay on this. So the mother of Shinomi goes to a New York City council meeting. I'm telling you, that woman really is a reproductive justice advocate, but is not gonna let her daughter die in vain despite the way she was treated in the hospital. So she goes to this black maternal New York City council meeting on the part of her daughter to help avoid any future deaths like this. That woman is strong. Okay? She says, I was naive to believe that it was just a lack of knowledge that could keep these maternal death rates down. I appreciate the awareness. And she was like, it's racism and anti-black racism especially that has kept this going and why it needs to change. I was like, oh, pin drop. You could have heard a pin drop. I mean, like a needle. All right? Dr. Neal, the guy that convened the panel that Bruce was on, was a doctor at Harvard, and goes to a hospital in Tulsa to help talk about black maternal health care. Now, he's like an Indian American, not an indigenous person or a native person. I'm talking about Indian, like from India. I'm always blown, though, how these Harvard people are often the root of these problems. Okay? Considering their history with the black exploitation of their bodies, and that's throughout all these Ivy Leagues. UPenn had craniums from black people that they had been keeping and got exposed on the news around 2020. Okay? And they were still experimenting on black stuff, black bodies. Okay? So this ain't no small stuff. So, and the fact that he's Indian doesn't change it for me because anti-black racism is real. And then they send their Harvard-trained people to then study the problems that Harvard doctors have helped create and endorse over time. Just like the economy. When the economy screws up because the Harvards, the U Chicagos, the Stanfords, the Princetons, the Yales, the same people who fuck it up, who have gone from these Ivy Leagues to Wall Street, are then brought down to the White House to fix the problem that they created. Instead of finding somebody who can actually regulate them and their capitalism and greed and exploitation. So that's what I got to say on that. Okay, but we're going to talk about Dr. Neal. I guess he's trying to do the right thing, but whenever there's a camera involved and somebody talking about black maternal health care from a place like Harvard, where, it's Cambridge, and I have people in my family that have graduated from those top institutions that I have just mentioned 1 and 2 times over. It don't stop it from being racist. And that's how I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, all right? So, one of the things that Dr. Neal, this Harvard guy, pointed out was that the hospital gets paid about 50% more if you do a C-section. And C-sections are being disproportionately done on black women. He was like, I believe in C-sections as necessary. I'm a surgeon. I've done them, but I believe in doing them when they're necessary. And the fact that you get paid 50% more, there's already an economic incentive to do this cutting on black bodies. So he goes down to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where black women are responsible for 10% of the births in that city. Yet they are 20% of the deaths in maternal health care. The math ain't mathing. It's not mathing. Okay? Now, and this is one of the worst places in the country to give birth for no other reason than the fact that you're a black woman. It's not due to a lack of facilities or science or technology. So the hospital Dr. Neal traveled to, he showed this black woman going in for care in this hospital where most women are going in. A lot of black women do go to this hospital in Tulsa, getting treated as a client, not a patient. Client, she was like, they rushed me through. There's no time to build a relationship or trust. And there's no willingness to build a relationship or trust with the doctor and that kind of thing. And so she starts looking for options, like birthing centers, and we'll get to that in a second. But then there's this black midwife who got, bachelor's of science in nursing, and then decided to get her master's in midwifery. But she got it because she was very frustrated with working at an Ivy League hospital, as she describes it, and watching black women get a lack of health care. And she was like, and it was only on black women that they would do certain things. So the black midwife, which actually gave us a lot of stuff, talked about the history of J. Marion Sims, who used to have a statue on the Upper East Side calling him the father of gynecology, and he's still considered that. But the way he got his science was the exploitation of enslaved women's bodies to build the study of gynecology. That came at the expense of enslaved women who couldn't consent or not consent, who had been raped, who had been abused, so on and so forth, to make sure that white women could bring their babies into the world in as much comfort as possible and have protection, and to try out and experiment medicines and surgeries on them, and many of them died. They were murdered. Okay? So she was like, I worked at an elite hospital. She tells her story or whatever. And she was like, white people with private insurance will always get treated better. They'll have a doctor on call for them anytime they need. And she was like, and I witnessed C-sections where black women didn't even need them. But the doctor that she was like, the doctor, like, an intern is still a doctor, like, who needs to learn to cut in surgery, will tell that expecting black mother that they need a C-section only because they need to learn how to do a C-section. And they can get away with it because it's a black person and people don't take black people seriously in the court, so on and so forth. And you can anticipate that they'd have a lack of money and resources. And that shit pissed me the fuck off because I know she's telling the truth. So there are too many fucking stories like this for me. Okay? They had to rally to demand black maternal health care. This black doula was like, if white women were dying at the rate we do, it would be a national emergency. And I said, absolutely. Why is this not an emergency? And she was like, and as far as I'm concerned, because we're black is enough. You need to ask white people why that's enough, not us. So then the mother said, the mother, Shamani's mother, was like, my child's death was the earthquake. She was like, but it's the stuff after. She said, and I consider what we're going through now the aftershock. Like where the mother, she was like, where I wake up crying in the middle of the night, realizing that my daughter is not here. And she didn't have to not be here. And, her grandkids and their well-being without their mother, her partner's well-being, her husband's well-being now that he's a father without them and trying to balance everything, that did not have to be. And then there was a doula talking about how she encourages people to understand, a black woman doula, and encourages people to understand there are options to not have a baby in the hospital. And she was like, the bottom line is we can't wait for anybody to save us. They're not going to save us. This is an SOS situation. We have to save ourselves. And she was like, black women who want to be safe should consider, other options. And I just hate that black women cannot have access to regular advanced health care that exists all over this country to give birth in hospitals, as if we're not human beings. It's another black tax, as historians call it. Now you have to go outside your hospital, outside of your regular insurance, to find people outside your network that would normally be on the website for you when you go to your health insurance to figure out, what kind of doctor and do the filters, to look for black women and black women doulas. and then find the appropriate money to pay for them, because a lot of times insurance will not cover them. Because who's more likely to do that? Who's more likely to need them? Black women. So they almost put you in a maze where you will end up dead, or your child may end up dead. And that, to me, is a form of genocide. Check the United Nations definition for genocide, and then come holler at me before you come talking to me. So this was the black woman. This black woman is in Tulsa, the one that was talking about this. People rushing her out of the hospital, stuff like that. And she chose a birth center instead of a hospital. And she was like, it's the best. And there's actually people who drive from places like Arkansas to come in to get good maternal health care at a non-hospital. And these are black women because they cannot expect to get it in a hospital. And that shit is absolutely unacceptable. That it's necessary for them to ensure their livelihood, their health, and their child's livelihood and health. So, yeah, insurance doesn't cover birthing centers. And to me, they do it to make it harder for black women to have healthy, safe births. So when they choose not to allow doctors to abuse their bodies, then black women get punished. Sound familiar? It should, from slavery. So the black nurse turned midwife, who I told you about earlier, she even brought up the history of how George Washington actually paid his enslaved midwife. And I know you're like, well, how are they enslaved if they're getting paid? Because she has no choice and can't leave the labor camp, also known as a plantation. A labor camp is a more appropriate word. Because she was so valued that George Washington would give her money. He wanted to make sure that there were generations of healthy, born, enslaved Africans. Because you know what? When you force breed your slaves, you don't have to go to the auction block and pay for them. So then you get free laborers born. You haven't had to invest in buying slaves for quite some time. And you get to use their labor for free and then profit in terms of your production of crops. Ain't that about a bitch? Anyway, so she then explains, though, the history of black women and midwifery in the 20th century, because many black people had to do with midwife. My grandmother had a midwives for a lot of her children. And she explains how it became illegal for black women to practice midwifery in places like the South, where the majority of black people live, in the mid-20th century. And instead of being an apprentice job, because many midwives were training their daughters to be midwives, or other girls in the neighborhood who wanted to be midwives, it became book-based. You had to go to school to get certified to be a midwife. Well, black women legally were unable to obtain advanced education, right? And those programs in midwifery were in these majority white institutions to which they were locked out of, public or private. And she said, honestly, they were effectively and quite frankly constructively pushed out of a field that helped black women deliver healthy black babies. The same way black women teachers were fired with integration, as white parents complained they didn't want black teachers teaching their kids, and then they complained that it was racist to have black teachers teach only black kids. And so black women get pushed out, and a lot of those expectations of black kids get dropped. White women get replace them in all these facets, and we're left struggling, holding a bag, and wondering if our kids are safe in school because we can't ensure that they won't have psychological damage from the way they're treated by racists. In the words of James Baldwin, you can't be taught by someone who despises you. All right, so then we get Bruce working. Bruce was the guy from the Bronx, okay? Working with two doulas, one black woman and one Latina, to bring a birthing center to the Bronx. The Bronx has one of the highest cesarean rates in the city, in the state. And I hate that black people have to go out of their way to start building a birthing center, because all it reminds me of, or says to me, is that our insurance and hospital care are rigged against us. And so once again, the black tax, okay? So this isn't a regular nonprofit charity. I'm some rich man's wife and decided this is what I wanted to do, my passion project. This is something being built by these two doulas along with Bruce to ensure that black women are not dying during birth or right after birth for shit that shouldn't have to happen for the safety of these women. So Dr. Neal, the Harvard guy, brings Bruce to speak to his class about, to his OBGYN medical students. And there were some black women in the class. Most of them were white. To help them understand what it means, essentially, to use cultural competency when handling black mothers, which should be you just give care to all your patients properly. Exactly. Anyway, so after Bruce spoke, he was obviously, still impassioned, upset, hurt, enraged as he was still talking the story. And then white women sitting in that class still didn't get it. The black lady who was in the class, talked about, how this was affecting her, how she remembers reading it on the news. She thanks him for sharing his story. And, basically wants to do everything she can as a doctor to keep this from happening. Then the white woman decided to speak up. And the two white women speak up. And one white bitch said, well, I know you said this should never happen again, but the bottom line is it will. So I think it's best that there be places of healing and activism. Bitch, the activism is you sitting with this and studying and going to the Bronx next time instead of Bruce having to come to Harvard where don't know black people, where it ain't even hardly no black people around the campus unless they're in service to them. That's the activism. Going in there and doing your fucking job right is the activism. And see, this is my problem with that diversity, equity, and inclusion bullshit. White people have learned what to say or what they think to say to cover. Well, I acknowledge I have white privilege, because the other white girl was like, as a white person, I know I'm going to have a blind spot and no lived experience with racism. And I'm like, it don't have to be a blind spot, baby. You could actually get to work. And since you at Harvard, I'm going to presume you have plenty of resources. Suck it up and figure it out. But see, they don't have to, because that's the privilege of power of white supremacy. So I'm just sitting up there like that DEI bullshit. White people know racism is a problem. And they've been taught some bullshit responses. They know what to say, but they don't stop their behavior and actions. And even in their responses, the undertone is, yes, I acknowledge that this happens, but then I'm going to go right back to doing what white people do, because it reinforces a lot of this diversity stuff. Ooh, thank God I'm not them. And I'm sure after this, they went and ate kale salads and lattes. And the black medical student probably went back to her apartment and cried because she felt that woman's pain and wonders if she can really do this and feel a burden to save the race and all the black women who give birth. See how different that is? I don't know that that's what happened, but I'm just saying that's a good chance of what happened. So the doc ends with, a series of events. Omari celebrating his son's first birthday without the mother for something that could have been avoided. Okay. The mother, Shawnee, who's Shamani's mother, and Omari's, mother-in-law, speaks at a rally on the National Mall by the National Action Network, where she starts by stating Black Lives Matter, but black wounds create black lives, and we can't forget that. And that was very powerful. So the protection of black lives, black women are the root of it, and have to be protected, understanding they're the root of it. And this was designed to put pressure on Capitol Hill to start getting policies to protect black women, and therefore hold doctors accountable for their poor treatment. They clearly know how to deliver babies. If other ones would get here and say, fuck out of here. So then it ends with a congressman who's, a congressional hearing, and a man named Charles Johnson, whose wife, Kyra Johnson, and he was, getting emotional. He was like, my wife won't be able to wake up in bed to breakfast for this Mother's Day because she died in childbirth because of racism and neglect. He brought up Amber Rose Isaac, Bruce's partner, and said her son won't even experience his first Mother's Day, and talks about Shamani. And all I could think, it was kind of painful. It's hurtful to watch this, because you think about the emotional burden and the tax to fight for the rights that should have been yours at birth, for things that don't have to be a burden and a problem. So this documentary is necessary, unfortunately, to help spread awareness, but I'm glad it's accessible. So if y'all have Hulu, go take a look and support it, and I'll see y'all later for Love and Maritime Tale.